Hello, you're listening to Truth Cat Radio at truthcatradio.com. The current time is 8:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm Richard Kary, and this is Beyond the Matrix. That current time, of course, is East Coast time, but I'm actually broadcasting from Chicago. Today we're going to be discussing Maleducation and Crimes of the Educators with our guest, Alex Newman. And we'll get to him shortly and our topic. First, I would like to mention that we are listener supported. We're not accepting corporate advertising, and we are not monetizing. Our archives are all free. So if you can, please support our station. We have a support page on our station website, URL www.truthcatradio.com, and PayPal is accepted. So anything you could spare would be appreciated to keep things going here. In the world of the independent media, no donation is too small. So please do whatever you can to help out. And please like our Truth Cat Facebook group and our pages for Truth Cat Radio and for Beyond the Matrix. If you do choose to call in, have any questions to ask tonight, or just want to say hi to Alex, just ask something about the topic, the call-in number will be 714-598-3125. Again, that's 714-598-3125. Please be sure to turn off your radio when you call in. Don't say anything when in the call-in queue. I will verbally just invite you to speak by your area code. And once again, if you could spare anything to help out the station, please do. It would be greatly appreciated. Now then, as I said, our guest tonight will be Alex Newman. Excited to have him on tonight, and I think you'll enjoy what he has to say. I mean, a lot of us lately have been hearing about Common Core from people around us, or reports in the independent media, or from firsthand. I mean, some people have, actually checked out their own child's school books and assignments, and just been a little stunned at a lot of the changes these days we've been seeing, just more and more in just the way everything with raising our young people in the education system has been gearing more and more towards. There's definitely more and more of something that definitely was not a focus and agenda in the past, and seems to be quite negative toward the individual and toward the people as a whole. Our topic, therefore, is going to be Maleducation and Crimes of the Educators. Now, Alex Newman, as an international journalist, he's an educator and consultant, and he's the president of Liberty Sentinel Media Inc., a small media consulting firm. He's currently based in the U.S., but has lived on 4 continents, having spent much of his life in Latin America, Europe, and Africa. He has a degree in foreign languages and speaks Spanish, French, Portuguese, German, Italian, and a little Swedish and Afrikaans. Alex also earned a degree in journalism from the University of Florida with emphasis on economics and international relations. He is co-author of the book Crimes of the Educators: How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy America's Children. And he has worked for numerous publications in the U.S. and abroad. I will be having Alex join us very shortly here. He's going to be discussing with us his own perspective.
Hang on, Richard. I'm going to try to bring him in here if you want. You think he's ready?
Okay, yeah, he should be, yes.
All right, well, I guess he didn't message you or anything saying he was ready or not, but we'll just do it anyway.
Okay.
Hey, guys.
Oh, there you go. Okay, Alex, can you turn up your volume a little bit?
Sure. Turn up my mic volume?
Yeah, you're on Skype. You on a PC?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll just either get closer to it or just go into your tools and all that options and just turn it up a little bit if you can.
Okay, let's...
Normally we like to do sound checks before we go on the air.
Good. Let's see.
Well, that's pretty recent. Just yell. All right, Richard, you want to take care of him?
Hello.
He's probably on a Mac. I bet he's on a Mac. You on a Mac, Alex?
No, actually, this is a regular old PC.
Right,
should I go to audio settings, maybe?
Yeah, audio settings. There you go. Just look at your thing. Is it about 90%?
Yeah, it says automatically adjust.
All right, turn off the auto and just set it to 90%.
Okay.
All righty. And that should
it seems to be.
All right,
okay,
awesome.
yeah, I put it.
Okay, there you go, guys. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Hello, Alex. Well, that's good timing. Yeah, I just finished giving a little introduction, just a description of you for the audience. And, well, how are you today? I'm glad you could make it.
I'm doing good. Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, great. I'm glad you could come on. Yeah. Thank you for agreeing to this. I know you said you would like to discuss the education system as I was exchanging emails with you. You were mentioning, well, Common Core I brought up, and I know a lot of people have heard a lot of things about it and have a lot of opinions on it. So we'd love to hear your perspectives on Common Core tonight. You also mentioned UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
Yep, the UNESCO. Yep.
Okay. Well, yeah. I think we would all definitely enjoy hearing your perspectives on that as well, and just the education system in general. I mean, I know you are an educator yourself, so it gives a good perspective as opposed to just anyone who's commenting on this. Someone who's actually been teaching. I think that's significant as well. And you seem like well, I mentioned to the audience you've lived on 4 different continents actually, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep, I grew up mostly in Latin America, Mexico, Brazil, and then we headed over to Europe and stayed there for a good while. Then I moved down to Africa, stayed there for a while, and then moved back to Europe and then back to the U.S. for a bit. And I've been bouncing around since I was a little kid and continuing to do that, although it's kind of getting old now. It was a blessing for a long time, but I think it's about time to start settling in somewhere, wherever I can find the most liberty. So.
Yes. I don't know, we seem to be getting a little bit of some interruption sounds going on there. I'm not really sure if that's just a problem with the reception, or I don't know. We'll see if it continues. But well, what made you then initially get involved in? Well, I mean, I know you ultimately co-wrote a book. I mentioned, just before you came on, the Crimes of the Educators that you co-wrote. But I mean, originally you set about getting into the teaching profession. That was just your original course, correct?
Well, I studied journalism, But as I was in university and looking around at the media landscape, I realized it was such a wasteland, such a joke, I was not under any circumstances willing to sell my soul to become a propagandist for the establishment. And most of the media outlets, at least what passes as quote unquote mainstream or the establishment media, is definitely falls in that category. So at that point, it felt a little bit hopeless. I was like, all right, well, I'm getting a journalism degree, and a lot of good that's going to do, since I'm not going to be able to write for any of these lame publications that just spew propaganda. And that ended up with me considering going into teaching. And eventually, I found a very, very good publication that I really liked, at the New American Magazine, and so that was kind of a lifesaver there. I was like, yes, something I can actually do in journalism without having to sell my soul, something where I can tell the truth and tell the truth as I see it. So that was a real blessing. But I've always been interested in education, and so it happened that I got into journalism anyway. Despite my initial thoughts about going into education, I'd even applied for some education jobs. But in the field of journalism, I ended up writing a lot on education, and over time, I came to realize that if we're going to preserve liberty, if we're going to preserve the U.S. Constitution, if we're going to preserve the United States of America as a free, independent nation based on Judeo-Christian values and kind of this idea that we all have God-given rights and that the government exists to protect those rights, as explained in the Declaration of Independence. It's self-evident that we have inalienable rights that come from our Creator, and that governments are instituted among men to protect these rights. So if that's going to continue, education is really where the battle is at. If freedom is going to continue, people who are concerned about these things need to be involved in the field of education, because the government schools, are quite frankly indoctrinating people in massive numbers to support statism and socialism and other very problematic ideologies that really aren't compatible with the founding ideas of the United States. And so realizing that, I took a closer look at what was happening, and in a sense, I actually never went to a government school in my life. I went to really some of the best private schools in the world, so I wasn't familiar with what was going on in the American schools. But I had to, spend some time researching and looking. And when I figured out about Common Core, that was a huge issue for me. I said, "Oh my goodness, what is this? National standards? What kind of lunacy is that?" And you dig deeper and you dig deeper and you dig deeper, and you realize that corruption is doesn't even begin to describe the horrors in terms of what's passing for education these days. And so that really culminated in me working with Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, who I consider him one of the heroes, one of the best educators of the last 100 years, maybe more, in the United States. He was involved in the fight for a good 50 years or so. He died last year at 90. But he spent, most of his career involved in education. He wrote, 12 books about education. He was at the forefront of digging out so much of this information. He was a real researcher. Go into the university libraries and look through, the correspondence of some of the people who shaped the government education system that we have today. And so I was very blessed to be able to work with him on his final book, Crimes of the Educators, which we co-authored. And I learned so much doing that project, and I still only know a fraction of what I need to know, but it's it's scandal piled on top of scandal piled on top of scandal. And it's to summarize very briefly, the education system as it exists today in the United States was designed to dumb down the population, to de-Christianize the United States, and to move us toward a socialist, totalitarian, first national and eventually global system. And this is actually at this point undeniable. It's not even really secret. You can read these people's letters, you can read their essays, their books. Nowadays, the UN is actually putting out press releases bragging that this is the agenda. I get the UN press releases from UNESCO and from other UN agencies to my inbox, and they say, hey, education needs to be globalized, and all the schools need to teach children about being global green citizens, and we need to preach humanism to the children. And so education today is actually the opposite of what it was at one time. At one time, it was designed to, first of all, teach children the truth and the facts and how to think and scripture. And today, it's really the opposite of those things, right? It's designed to teach children what to think, not how to think, and it's designed to, alienate them from their parents, alienate them from their heritage, or even abolish their heritage. To manufacture en masse little socialist, communistic, humanistic, atheistic, drones. And unfortunately, our republic as a free nation is not going to survive under these circumstances unless we get busy and turn that around.
And I mean, this is an attack of, it's ultimately an attack on the individual and on just independent thinking. Isn't that right? I mean, there seem to be a lot of agendas for just a new government system and attitude, but I see that every area has really been affected as far as mathematics and then of course history. The history books I would hate to see these days, and I'm sure science and then the social sciences in particular. I've noticed extreme focus. I don't know if you would care to comment, on each of these areas a bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, you actually hit the nail right on the head, Richard, when you talk about the attack on the individual. If you actually go back, one of the key characters that we focus on in the book is John Dewey. And, it's not by chance that we focus on him. You can go to Wikipedia today. You can ask any educator, anybody who went through a teacher's college today about John Dewey, and they'll unanimously tell you he's, the founding father of government education in America. He's the godfather of government education, and he designed the public school system as it exists today. And if you actually go back and look at this guy, he was, one thing that's positive that you can say about him is he was pretty honest about what his agenda was. If you read his essays, if you read his writings, if you read what he was involved in his life, an attack on the individual is exactly what he was going for. He talked about the kids need to, education needs to bring people into sharing in the social consciousness, and people need to see themselves as part of the whole. And he wanted to get rid of individualism, and that's absolutely clear through all his writings. And I'll give you a few examples. He had this belief that America should move toward a socialist society. He actually went over to the Soviet Union and worked with Lenin, and he thought that was all good and well. And if you read his books, he just openly said that we need to get rid of individualism. We need to try. Why do we need to teach little kids about reading and math? We need to socialize them and make them into good little collectivists. And his model for what he wanted to see in America, he told us it was a novel by a character named Edward Bellamy. The novel was called Looking Backward, and it was a novel about the future, a fantasy novel about a communist America in the year 2000. And the idea in this novel was no private property, no God, no individualism. Everyone just kind of works for the good of the collective. And if that sounds like North Korea or Cuba or Zimbabwe, good, it should, because that's really kind of the vision that he was talking about. And in fairness to him, he didn't have the last 100 years of history that we have to look back and say, oh my goodness, everywhere and anywhere that socialism has been tried, it always results in terror and mass death and shortages and poverty and misery and gulags and executions and concentration camps. So in fairness to him, he didn't have the breadth of historical experience that we have. But nowadays we can look at National Socialism was tried in Germany. That was one of the most horrifying experiences humanity has endured. You had International Socialism ruled out of Moscow, and of course the connections to New York and so on, and Washington D.C. And here's another example of an absolute unmitigated human disaster. Genocide in Ukraine, 10 million people. Stalin butchered 10, 20, 30 million people. You look at socialism in communist China. Maybe 60 to 100 million dead. So anywhere and everywhere that this so-called ideology has been tried, we see what it results in. It's just absolute horror on a mass scale. And John Dewey didn't have that historical perspective. So, but he should have known better. And I think one of the really big areas in which he went wrong is he kind of abandoned, the faith of his parents and of his heritage. He was actually one of the signers of the first Humanist Manifesto, the Humanist Manifesto 1. And, this is about as anti-Christian, as anti-theist as you can get. the very first plank of this manifesto, for example, says that we believe the universe is self-existing and not created. And if you compare that to the Bible, the universe, it says quite clearly that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So his idea was that you would never be able to impose socialism, communism, collectivism on the United States as long as the people were reading their Bibles and were Christian, and as long as the people could read. And so he set about systematically to undermine those two key facets. And actually, we reprinted one of his essays in our book. It's The Primary Education Fetish, where he argues that we don't need to teach little kids about reading and that kind of stuff. We just need to socialize them. And in this essay, he says that we have to do this slowly and quietly, because if people see what we're doing, there's going to be a revolution, a backlash that's going to jeopardize the success of what we're doing here. So this is the kind of language of a conspirator. We got to do it in the shadows. We got to do it in secret, because if people figure out, they're going to flip out. But unfortunately, this guy set up a system with, of course, help from the Rockefellers. They had the General Education Board philanthropy, but they gave millions of dollars to this guy to promote this craziness. And unfortunately, he was able to seize upon the already existing architecture that had been set up by Horace Mann and his disciples, as compulsory government indoctrination system, and use that to promote his ideas. Socialism, Marxism, evolutionism, humanism, and moving away toward a free and independent America. This idea with God-given rights and really everything that America was founded on, and move it toward more what we saw in the Soviet Union, more what the United States is heading for right now. This kind of anti-God, anti-freedom, anti-civilization society where the government is completely out of control, the individual is not respected, the individual's rights are not even acknowledged or respected. And unfortunately, that's where we're moving toward. And it took a long time to go from highly educated, very free society to where we're at now. And if you look at the numbers, it's just disastrous. Something like 55% of Americans in 1993 in a federal literacy survey either could not read or could barely read, basically functionally illiterate. So it took a lot of effort to get us from where we were, the most highly educated society, the most advanced society in the world, to being, this kind of morass that we've become today. But people need to understand, it wasn't an accident. It's not that we just suddenly woke up one day and said, oh, we're spending $1 trillion a year on education, and we're mass producing dummies who can't even read their high school diplomas. That it was no such thing. It was a deliberate and orchestrated attack on the foundations of our society. And the purpose was, again, to rob us of our liberties, to rob us of our heritage, and to rob us of our faith. And, it's a very dangerous thing that we're dealing with here. And, again, we can look back at history and see where this ends. And, it's troubling. It should be troubling to all of us, because it doesn't end well. And that's really at the heart of why I got so involved in education, because every dictator in all of history has understood that to impose your tyranny, you need to control the minds of the youth. And every liberty-minded person needs to understand that to preserve our freedom, we need to resist that trend. And then Common Core is really a giant step in that direction, right? You have this national standardized curriculum where all the kids are supposed to learn the same propaganda, the same dumbed-down math, the same quack literacy methods. And, you mentioned science. This is absolutely happening in science as well. The same Common Core people, which, is Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg types who created this monstrosity, all funded by Bill Gates, who, of course, would never let his children go anywhere near a Common Core school, right? He's too good for that. But the science agenda that they created, they call it the next generation science standards, is, it's monstrosity piled on top of a monstrosity. So, the core of this science agenda is to indoctrinate the kids in evolutionism. They need to believe that they came from slime that turned into fish, that turned into monkeys, that turned into people, and, therefore, a human life really has no value. You're no better than your pet cat or your pet goldfish, right? And the purpose of life is to propagate your genes. And, under this kind of worldview, under this kind of theology, you can imagine that it would be pretty easy to perpetrate atrocities, right? Humans are just biological stimulus response mechanisms that happened, by chance on some rock in the middle of the universe. Life has no value. Humanity is the end all and be all. And that's why you see that this ideology has been so important to all the tyrannies of the last century. You know, the Chinese communists, when they took over, one of the first things they did was make sure that all the people were indoctrinated into evolutionism. So that's a huge element of it. Then you have and I should say, despite all of the propaganda, Americans by and large have in many ways resisted this. You know, if you look at the polls, the last one that I looked at and actually wrote about it showed that more than 50% of Americans reject the evolution theory, and that's despite generations of brainwashing in the schools to believe this. But and then you also have, of course, the climate change propaganda, right? That the global warming is going to kill us all. That literally the gas that we exhale, carbon dioxide, is this toxic poison that's going to cook the planet if we don't submit to a UN world government and pay carbon taxes and submit to carbon dioxide regulations from the UN. And if you spend 2 seconds thinking about this, you realize the evil and the horror of it all. Every human activity produces CO2. Literally sitting on the couch or sleeping, you're producing CO2, because CO2 is the gas that we exhale. This is the kind of stuff that people learn in first, second, third grade science, right? You exhale carbon dioxide. Literally everything you do produces carbon dioxide. So if we subscribe to this silly theory that carbon dioxide is bad, rather than the gas of life that all plants need to survive, then you can imagine what kind of a totalitarian system could be built. If every human activity produces CO2, and CO2 is pollution that needs to be regulated and taxed at the global level, well, use your imagination. It leads to a very troubling place. And so this is really what's happening in education. You touched on history too. History at this point in the United States, it's not taught at all in the government schools. What they call history is almost the opposite of history. It's it's an indoctrination program. They don't teach the kids anything except propaganda about the Constitution, about the Declaration of Independence. Instead, they learn that America is this evil, racist, genocidal, all the other bad things you can think about. They never learn anything about the uniqueness, about the the amazingness of this, even just this idea that America was founded on, this idea that it's a self-evident truth that our Creator has given us rights, and that we create governments to protect these rights, and that among these rights are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and property, and these things. So instead of learning about those things, instead of learning real history, they learn indoctrination. They get feminist studies and ethnic studies, and all these kinds of fake studies. And a really good example of this, which has gotten unfortunately a good amount of attention, is the advanced placement, the AP history course. It's incredible how they have erased our history. And if you look at it from a historical perspective, you can understand why. If they can erase history from the minds of the American people, first of all, they won't realize what danger they're in. Second of all, they won't realize what they're losing, right? America is a unique civilization. Nothing like this has ever really been tried in human history. And if people don't understand that, if people are just brainwashed into thinking that, and I'm not going to say everything about American history is perfect, but by no means is that the case. But, if any fair teaching of history would have to include, the uniqueness and the amazingness and the blessing that was America. So when you erase that from the minds of the children, you make it much easier to subvert, right? If the kids don't know what they're losing, it's very easy to steal their heritage from them. It's very easy to implement a totalitarian model. And that is the purpose behind all of what's happening, right? It's to implement this totalitarian global system that a lot of the globalists call a new world order. And unfortunately, it's moving to the global level now. If you see UNESCO, which you touched on before, the UN Education Agency, they have grandiose plans to globalize the education system. Obama's education secretary for the first 7 years of his administration, he said UNESCO was his global partner in cradle-to-career education reform, and he bragged that the schools are going to be creating green global citizens, and that this quack notion of sustainable development, which is really sustainable tyranny and sustainable population control, reducing the number of humans on the planet, that this is going to be embedded into every fiber of the curriculum in the schools. And people with different political views, I think, can agree that we don't send our kids to school to be turned into green global citizens, right? That's craziness. But if you look at what UNESCO is doing, they're openly perpetrating this on us. They have pornographic sex education. They want to teach 4-year-old kids disgusting things that I won't even mention on the air. They want to teach literacy in a way that has been known since the 1840s to produce dyslexia, to produce reading disabilities, to permanently handicap and harm the minds of these children. And this is well known. This has been known again from the 1840s, that these quack methods that they use mass produce illiteracy. And so UNESCO says, hey, let's do this at the global level. And nowadays they openly talk about that the schools need to teach the values and the attitudes that UNESCO wants, and that these should be humanism and globalism and this type of stuff. So humanity is at a very big risk right now of falling into a dangerous global system, a system that will be marked by absolute tyranny, absolute despotism, a total lack of freedom. And once our freedom goes, our prosperity goes too. And for people who don't mind losing their freedom so much, well, you're going to lose a lot of your material comforts and your material prosperity as well, assuming you survive. One of the things that is consistent throughout these expressions of globalism by these people is the need for population control, right? The alleged need for population control. We need to reduce the number of humans on the planet. And having traveled to a lot of these UN conferences, the UN conferences on sustainable development and global warming, they don't even bother to hide it anymore. They brag about how they want to reduce the population, how they are reducing the population. I went to the UN Global Warming Summit in Copenhagen in 2009. The Communist Chinese dictatorship, the worst mass murdering regime on the history of humanity, they were bragging about how much they had reduced their carbon footprint by implementing this, disgusting one-child policy where they, force women to have abortions and murder their babies. It's sickening, really, when you see what's happening. And it all goes back to this education system. You would never be able to accomplish this sort of evil without having dumbed down and indoctrinated the population. And so that's why I always get back to education. First of all, we as adults need to educate ourselves. We need to come out of the brainwashing that we were subjected to in school, and we need to educate others. And of course, we all need to protect our children and the children that we love in our lives from this kind of evil. And at the same time, we need to realize that there are other children who kind of depend on the people who understand this stuff to protect them. There's millions of children in government school right now who are being, we call it abuse. In the book, we say that these children are being abused. They're being destroyed physically, mentally, spiritually by these schools and by the activities and the propaganda that's taking place there. And so, I consider it just absolutely one of the most important things is education. And so that's why I've focused on it so much in my work. That's why I'm a teacher. That's why I love teaching. It's why, I write so much about education. It's why I got involved with this book. And it's why I constantly tell people, one of the solutions that we're going to have to pursue if we're going to fix this is education. We need to restore real education, and we need to abolish this kind of fake indoctrination masquerading as education, or we're going to lose our freedom, we're going to lose our country, and ultimately a lot of us will lose our lives. So it really is that important.
And this organization, I was reading a little bit more about UNESCO, and it's been around for quite a long time, and even before World War II. I think it said it was dating back to the 20s. In some of the the discussions and development of it. I don't know about when it was actually implemented, but it has been around for the greater part of the 20th century. Is that right?
Yeah, it was actually founded technically in the late 1940s, and actually back then they were more honest in many ways about the purpose than they were for many decades after that. In the very beginning, they talked about that UNESCO needed to help make the schools combat family attitudes, and that the goal was creating a world political federation, and that humanism needed to be propagated using the schools in the minds of the children. And, of course, all the blabber about the peace, we need to build peace into the minds of people. But, you have to understand, when they talk about peace, they mean something very different than what a normal person means when we talk about peace. For them, the idea of peace is an absolute lack of resistance to their evil. So, once they've taken over the whole world, once nobody is able or willing to resist this anymore, that's when we have peace, right? So that's what they define as peace. And, people need to be on guard about that. They use a lot of nice-sounding terms. Human rights is another one. who could be against human rights, right? But then go read the UN Declaration on Human Rights. Go to Article 29. They'll tell you right there, none of these rights and freedoms may be used contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. These rights and freedoms may be limited by law, either to promote order or, for basically any reason that a government says. So these are fundamentally different than the real rights that America's founders fought and gave their lives to protect, right? In the United States, the idea was, God gives us rights, and we create a government to protect these pre-existing rights. The government didn't give us any rights, so government can't take away our rights. That's obvious. At the UN, they flip this on its head, right? The UNESCO and the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So they take this idea and make it completely backwards, right? So the source of your rights is government. The source of your rights are these international treaties and instruments and conventions and so on. And so really you don't have any rights, actually. A human right is not a right at all. And nowadays they're even redefining the entire concept of right. So rather than, freedom from coercion, the ability to say what you want without government restrictions, the ability to have the religion of your choice and live out your faith without government restrictions. So now they've flipped it on its head. Now they say you have a right to, quote unquote, education, right? And of course that means the government needs to provide you with your education, and that means they can indoctrinate you and convince you of this ridiculous idea that rights are things granted to you by government as opposed to, inalienable freedoms granted to you by God. So we have a very serious problem here. And UNESCO really is, in a big way, leading the charge. And I could talk about UNESCO for hours. The current head of UNESCO, Irina Bokova, Bulgarian communist, actually. I spent a good amount of time this last year exposing her because they were trying to line her up to be the next Secretary General of the United Nations. Fortunately, we were able to prevent that. The guy they put in her place was actually not a whole lot better. He's the former president of Socialist International, former socialist prime minister of Portugal, really the chief architect of this Islamic invasion, the tsunami of Islamic immigration from Africa and the Middle East. He is really the chief architect of this as the head of the UN High Commission for Refugees. He was the High Commissioner for Refugees, and he's kind of the one who orchestrated all this. So he's not a whole lot better than the head of UNESCO, who they were trying to put there. But it's all interrelated to. People need to understand that. The education agenda is interrelated with what the UN is doing and what the U.S. government is doing, and really with this overall goal. And they say it pretty openly now. Ban Ki-moon, the head of the United Nations now, he talks about the UN as the Parliament of Humanity, and he talks about Agenda 2030 as the Declaration of Interdependence for we the peoples. Right, so they're trying to rob the American people. They're trying to rob us of our heritage, of our God-given rights, of what was bequeathed to us by the founders, and they're trying to replace it with this, nightmarish vision of global totalitarianism. So, it's a lot going on, and really the solution is actually pretty simple. We just need to withdraw from all these organizations and quit funding them. But unfortunately, it goes back to education. We need an educated electorate to put pressure on Congress to be able to accomplish this. And unfortunately, we still have a lot of work to do in that respect.
Oh, so this is a unified attack on the education system. It's been going on for like some 75 years then, if you count this organization's influence, and just been increasing more and more. Is there much of a difference in other parts of the world, such as Europe or Latin America? The other places you've been, compared to here in the States, as far as the degree and I don't know, the focus perhaps. I know I've heard a lot about just how extreme the social conditioning has been getting in Sweden, for example. And I don't know, like from the different places that you've been, are there many differences at this point? I know there's a bit of a unified goal, but are there differences in how much things and what things are focused on in the different areas?
Well, there is. The goal is eventually to harmonize it all and to get it all at the same level. But, realistically, they've had to take it in incremental steps. Sweden is probably at the forefront of this. I spent a lot of time in Sweden. Some of my kids were born in Sweden. I spent many years living there, and one of the things I focused on there also was education. They banned homeschooling in 2010 or 2011, and they ordered all the nominally private schools, and they kind of seized control of the private schools years before that, when they said the government had to fund all the private schools. So then they forced all the private schools to teach the government curriculum. And when you look at the government curriculum, I mean, by American standards even, it is unbelievable. You know, by the time the kids hit second grade, for example, they need to be able to explain that gender is a social construct, right? You know, I mean, talk about kookery. And yet this is what passes for education in Sweden and some of the other Scandinavian countries. You know, in Latin America and parts of Latin America, they have not been able to get away with this so easily. You know, they got a later start there. People are still attached to, you know, their faith and their traditions and their values. And so it's been much more difficult to try to impose a lot of this. And, you know, it's at different stages in every place. But what you see is that in every country in the world, they're trying to get this agenda passed. Actually, UNESCO even has what they call the World Core Curriculum. And the goal is to eventually get that in every school in the world. This World Core Curriculum was developed by a guy called Robert Mueller. We talk about this in the book. He was a disciple of Alice Bailey. He actually dedicated this curriculum to Alice Bailey. And, you know, for people who don't know anything about Alice Bailey, I can give you, you know, a few hints, a few starting points, and you can dig deeper yourself. She was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, and I'm being dead serious, that's what it was called. They've since renamed it to the Lucius Trust. She also wrote all kinds of books, you know, and actually saying she wrote them is maybe not entirely accurate, because according to her, these books were written by what she called ascended masters, right? And so anybody who's read their Bible knows right away that we're talking about demons here. But she said, you know, these ascended masters would take over her body and use her to produce these books. And, you know, just open up any one of these books and prepare to have your mind blown, right? She's got one, Education in the New Age, right? You know, you want to take a trip down the rabbit hole, take a look at that book. She's got, you know, externalization.
Hey, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just jump in here real quick. Sorry, Richard.
Sure.
I just noticed we're past break time. I just got to do this real quick. Hey, listen, guys. Alex, if you need to go run real quick to the bathroom or anything, do it, okay?
Okay. I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Go for it.
All right, thanks.
Okay, everybody. Once again, this is Truth Cat Radio. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary. Oh, who left the radio on? Alex! Look at this. You did, huh? Richard, you hear that? Richard? All right. I guess, let me look. Looks like we're okay. Yeah, we were getting this.
I think it stopped.
It stopped, yeah. Okay, thank God. Threw me totally there. Anyway, again, this is Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary. My name is Stephen Kelly. That was Richard Kary you're listening to. Following this show in roughly 1 hour is going to be Mystic Freedom with Dave Robbins, and his guest tonight is going to be Marshall Keith. And I talked to Marshall a little bit, and I know it's going to be an interesting show. He's seems to be quite an interesting person. So we look forward to that. Tomorrow night, Mind Matters with Ahmad Inani is on at 6 p.m. Eastern. Daryl Nichols is up at 8 p.m. Eastern with the Daryl Show. And he is followed by Amanda Danielle with the Madison Star Moon Show. And on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, Aurelia Helios returns with Lady of Light. And I know she's got a really fun guest, too. We're getting lots of really good guests. She's followed at 8 p.m. Eastern by InfoFront with Trevor Labonte. And on Thursday, Graham Sutherland returns with Delete the Beast at 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's going to be a little dead space until I come on at 10 p.m. Eastern, and that's with the Stephen D. Kelly Show. And I'll follow up and find out if Tony's going to be on, but we'll see if he's going to be there. But I know for sure that Eric Dadmer will be on with Love Vibrations at 10 p.m. on Friday, 10 p.m. Eastern. But we will be back at 6 p.m. with Live from Palestine on Monday and more Beyond the Matrix. So I want to remind everybody that we do need your support economically as well as promotionally. If you can help us out, toss us $1 or $2 would be really, really cool. Facebook or PayPal is just the most convenient way to do it, and the information on how you can do that is on the site, the www.truthcatradio.com site, or you could just use the PayPal address, which is StephenKelly714@gmail.com. listen to you. You should have muted your microphone, Alex. My gosh, don't those Macs have mute buttons? I swear.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I
Look
pulled
at
the
you. Look at you. We're still on break. Mute it. All right.
There we go.
I get to harass Alex. These Mac. I got to just harass all the Mac users. That's it. Guys, come on. You're not muted. I still hear you. Come on.
So mute.
Yes, mute. Oh gosh, I hear my vegetables. Did you like that? I smell my vegetables. Okay, I don't hear anything. I have earmuffs on, but you know, when I smell something, it makes me think I'm hearing it. Anyway, back to, if you can support us, that'd be really great. We do need your help. Also, if you can help us out on Facebook and social media by promoting our ads and the various shows and the hosts, we do need a lot of help. To help these hosts get established. We've got a lot of new hosts that need to build their following, and your help with that is much appreciated. We really do appreciate that. Also, if you would like to be involved with Truth Cat Radio in a professional way, when I say professional, I mean as a volunteer, because of course this is a volunteer operation. We're strictly operating as a not-for-profit thing. Even though we need your money to pay the bills, we're still not doing this to make a buck. None of us are here to make a buck. We're here to try to save the world, what's left of it, and with what little bit of time we got left. Love the show so far. Awesome stuff. Very topical. And I hope that we could come up with a name or something to attract the people to watch the video, because I know that this thing you got up there with education doesn't quite drag them in like liberty being stolen by or through the education process or something of this nature. You know, you got to get some catchy thing to freak people out and go, oh, I got to listen to this. Anyway, guys, okay, let me return again to Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary, and I want to remind everybody when this is over very soon, we will have Dave Robbins up with Mystic Freedom. All right? See you later, Richard. See you in a little bit.
Okay. Thank you,
by the
Stephen.
way, if anybody wants to call in and talk to this guest, it's 714-598-3125. That's 714-598-3125. And if you want to use Skype, connect to me using Stephen D. Kelly and say that you would like to come on to the show. That's it.
Okay. Well, we're back, everyone. Alex, did you want to... I'm sorry. Did you want to pick up from where you left off?
What were we talking about when we stopped? World Core Curriculum and Alice Bailey. Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I would encourage people to look into this themselves, because I realize when I talk about it, it doesn't even sound credible that a woman who founded the Lucifer Publishing Company and claimed that ascended masters were taking over her body to write these crazy books about education in the New Age and externalizing the hierarchy and all this other kind of lunacy. I realize it sounds quite ridiculous. So I encourage people to look into Alice Bailey themselves. But this World Core Curriculum, it was created by an Undersecretary General of the United Nations who dedicated them to Alice Bailey. And, of course, Bill Gates actually signed a partnership with UNESCO back in 2004, 2005. He personally signed it. I've got the document, agreeing to create this master curriculum for teachers, where they wanted to, and this is actually a very similar strategy to what Dewey did. He said, you got to take over the education of the teachers so that you can ultimately take over education more generally. And, of course, that is what the UN and their UNESCO are trying to do. It's a very dangerous agenda, talking about dumbing down all of humanity and indoctrinating all of humanity with these crazy religious and moral views. And again, we have so much historical evidence about where this all leads, and so we don't really even need to use our imagination to realize how dangerous these trends are and how urgent it is that we get involved and do our best to stop this.
So I mean, it's quite a long-term plan. It's quite disturbing when you really just start to examine the full scope of it. Just as far as all of the disciplines, all of the different subject matters have been infiltrated in their own ways, and then just just the amount of years that have gone into this. And really, it's about the next generation, and even looking beyond that, I suppose. with the goals here. So I mean, what could we do? I mean, I guess one obvious possibility is just trying to get more rights in local areas for homeschooling. But other than that, though, I mean, what sort of things can we do to try and reverse this, to make people more aware? I mean, this is on a global scale, so that is quite disturbing.
It is, yep. But fortunately, there are still a lot of things that we can do. And so when people ask me, what do we do about this? Yeah, it's horrible. Oh my goodness, a disaster. Now what do we do? The first and foremost thing on there is for every person who listens to this, every person who understands this, you need to protect the children in your life that you know. If you have kids, start with them. Pull them out of the government schools immediately. Immediately, right now. There's no excuse to keep them in there knowing what you know. You're putting their minds and their souls and their physical selves at grave risk by leaving them in there. And, that's not to say that there's no good teachers in the government schools. I know lots of them who are on the front lines, who are doing everything they can within this evil system to do as much good and to rescue as many children as possible. But overall, the system is designed to dumb down the students, to pervert their minds, to destroy their faith in God. And so parents and grandparents and uncles and aunts and neighbors, you have an obligation to protect the children in your lives from this monstrosity that passes for education. Second of all, we can't abandon the rest of the kids out there. So that means getting involved at the local, at the state, and unfortunately now at the federal and at the global level to put a stop to this. So first and foremost, people ought to be if you don't know the people on your school board, if you haven't talked to them, that's a problem, right? These people are shaping the minds of the children in your community. How is it that people are not concerned about that? So, make an appointment, meet with your, local school district commissioner, whoever is in charge of, your local school. Make sure you meet with them, inform them about these types of things, right? Talk to your state representative. If you don't know who your state representative is, that's a problem. Look it up, find out who it is, call up their office. They don't get a whole lot of attention. 99 out of 100 people in your district probably won't know their name. So call up their offices, say, hey, my name is such and such. I live in your district. I have some things on my mind I want to talk to you about. You're my representative. I want to tell you how I want you to represent me. And go and meet with them and say, hey, why is our state involved in Common Core? Why are you forcing our local school district? Why are you forcing our community to indoctrinate the children with this kind of quackery? And that's another good step. What about your congressman? Do you know the name of your congressman? If you don't know the name and the phone number of your congressman, that's a problem. Get on the phone with them. Ask them to set up a meeting. Tell them you want to talk to them about what's on your mind. Tell them, hey, this education system is not okay. Why is the federal government funding the Department of Education? The Department of Education is unconstitutional. What are you doing voting for legislation that appropriates money for this unconstitutional bureaucracy? Didn't you take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution? Didn't you take an oath with your hand on the Bible to uphold the Constitution? What do you think you're doing by sending our tax money unconstitutionally to this unconstitutional bureaucracy? And so, those are some of the things we can do. One of the most important things, of course, is to educate ourselves, right? If we're not educated, we obviously can't educate others. So we all have a responsibility as, as self-governing people to be educated on all of these issues. So, I would say a very good place to start could be Crimes of the Educators, if you haven't read it. And I don't mean to be self-promotional. It's just that we have, a lot of good research. There are a lot of good resources in there, and you can, anything you wonder more about, you can go back to the back of the book, open up the bibliography, and say, okay, what's the source of that? You can track it down. Oftentimes, it's primary source documents. So, you can educate yourself using all the resources that are out there. There's so much out there. Go to thenewamerican.com. We've got tons of articles exposing this kind of stuff. All the sources are included, so people can research that. Go to the library. There's that old saying, they hide all the secrets in the library, and it's not a joke. That is where all the secrets are hiding. Right? Just walk down to the library and get yourself a book. So once we're educated as Americans, then we can educate our neighbors, we can educate our communities, we can educate our legislators, we can educate our county commissioners and our school board members and our state representatives. And we really need to get doing that. America was founded on the principle that an educated citizenry was going to be electing representatives and taking care that things are done properly and that the Constitution is obeyed. The more we move away from that, the easier it becomes to impose this kind of tyranny on us, whether it be through the education system or through the spying or through the constant attacking of our rights or the illegal wars, or take your pick, name your issue, there it is. And so, those are some of the things we can do. There's a number of very good organizations out there doing a lot of good work. I encourage people to get involved. See what your thing is. The John Birch Society is a very good one. They have chapters in all 50 states where they work together to educate their communities and educate their opinion molders in their communities to try to amplify that impact, to support and uphold the Constitution and to expose the forces working to subvert it. So that's one of the many groups that you can get involved with. There's so many things we can do. Subscribe to the New American Magazine. So many things. And I think that's a good start. And also I think it'd be silly to omit obviously the most important thing. Really in the end it's in the hands of God. And so I think we really need to be praying as the American people and say, what, our country has gone really wrong. We have more than 50 million babies slaughtered since Roe versus Wade. The country is totally off the rails now. But I'm confident that if God decided to intervene, he could turn this mess around instantly. So, it never hurts to ask. And, I think people need to get back to all these things. If you're not familiar with your Bible, if you don't know your Constitution, if you don't know history, if you don't know science, we need to know about all of these things to be well-rounded, well-educated citizens who are capable of self-government. And so really, it goes back to education again, Richard. I say everybody needs to get educated, and it's our responsibility to educate. It's not the school's responsibility. It's not the government's responsibility. It's not Richard Kary's responsibility. It's not Alex Newman's responsibility to educate you. It's your responsibility as an American citizen, as a father, as a mother, as a grandparent, as an uncle, whatever you are. It's your responsibility to educate yourself. And, we need to take that responsibility seriously. So those are, some of the things that I always recommend to people in terms of what can be done. But we can go back to what I started with, protect your kids from this. I can't emphasize it strongly enough. The kids are being damaged in massive numbers in the system. Look at what's going on in the schools. Look at the federal government's own numbers. Right? In 1983, Reagan put together a commission that looked at the education system, and he said if a foreign power had imposed this, we would have considered it an act of war. When your own federal government is telling you that the education system is so monstrous that we would have considered it an act of war if foreigners had imposed it, we have a problem. And, that was more than a generation ago. It's gotten a lot worse since then. So, we got to wake up, we got to smell the roses, we got to protect our kids, and we have to get educated.
I don't know if people realize just how much this has been progressing. If that's an issue, I mean, I don't know. Perhaps some of at least the people who have a little bit of an easier time, I guess, in the education system. Didn't see as much of the indoctrination. I mean, not the children who are in school now, but say 1 to 2 generations prior to that. I mean, it seems like some of these agendas were in place, but not that much. I mean, I don't know. I know they're even trying to have laws to restrict parents from looking at their children's homework and things like this. They're trying to. So I mean, they clearly have something to hide. I mean, but. I don't know. Perhaps a lot of people just aren't really convinced yet. I mean, because even myself, having gone through school in the 80s and early 90s, I mean, I didn't get the impression of it being, quite as bad as from what I'm hearing now. But I'm sure that a lot of the information was compromised at even that point. I mean, would you agree with that as well?
Well, it has been getting progressively worse, and actually it's accelerating how quickly it's getting bad. But it's been, you're right, a progressive thing. And you can show this using all of the objective data. And one of the ways that we can do this is look at the SATs, right? We can show that the dumb kids in the 50s and the 60s were smarter than the smart kids are today, based on the SAT scores. And what they do is every 10 years they dumb down the test to conceal the scale of the dumbing down, and they call it recentering, right? So they want to keep the average at about 500, and so as it starts dropping and dropping and dropping, they make the test easier to bring the average back up to about 500. But a lot of the manipulation is actually very subtle. So a lot of the people who went through this, they don't even realize what's been done to them. I read a book not too long ago, published in 1978. It was called Change Agents in the Schools. And, it was amazing, the manipulation that was going on in the 70s. It's designed in a way so that it's very scientific. They spent a lot of time, a lot of behavioral psychologists investigated this and found the best ways of doing it, where they would try to manipulate the way that kids think. And, I can give you some examples. They call it values clarification, right? So, I don't know if you personally experienced this, but I know I did in my schools. I went to some of the best international schools in the world where I got an extra heavy dose of, pro-UN indoctrination and so on. But the values clarification, they'll set up these kind of scenarios that are, on their face ridiculous about it if you think about them for a minute. But they'll say, so you're in a lifeboat, right? Your ship has sunk, and you're in a lifeboat, and there's 10 people in the lifeboat, but the lifeboat can only hold 8. Which 2 are you going to throw out of the boat? And they don't say it, but which 2 are you going to kill by throwing them out of the boat? And then they tell you, well, you have a priest, you have a rabbi, you have a newborn baby, you have an auto mechanic, and then you're supposed to decide in a little group which 2 people you're just going to throw out of the boat and kill. Rather than saying, how are you going to save the extra people, right? Maybe you'll throw 2 people behind who can, tie them to a rope and they can swim behind the boat and you can take turns, or maybe you flip it upside down and float on it that way. All kinds of different ways you could sign there. There's infinite variations on that. They'll say you're in a nuclear shelter bunker and there's been a nuclear explosion. And there's only supplies for 12 people to survive, but you've got 20 people in the bunker. Which 8 people are you going to kill? Right? Or in India, I saw recently one that they had there. There's this overpopulation crisis. So should the government implement harsh measures to deal with the overpopulation crisis? So it starts with a false premise, the idea that there is this overpopulation crisis. And then they say, this is critical thinking, right? Because you're thinking about how the government should deal with the overpopulation crisis, the alleged overpopulation crisis. What they don't say is, well, let's examine the premise. Is there really an overpopulation crisis? Is it really acceptable in the first place for the government to be involved in managing the size of the population? And so they never bring these things up. And so the kids walk away from there thinking, oh, we were doing critical thinking today because we were deciding whether it was appropriate for governments to use harsh measures to control the population crisis, never stopping to think, well, is there actually a population crisis? Right? And it really goes back to, everything that they're doing is essentially a contradiction of God's instructions to us. The sustainable development stuff, the overpopulation stuff, the brainwashing in the schools aimed at, teaching kids this stuff. In the very beginning, God says to be fruitful and to multiply and to subdue the earth. And so these people are advocating the opposite of that, right? There's too many people. I saw this at the UN Sustainability Summit, this poster with a sick earth, and the doctor comes up and he says, oh, I know your problem. You have humans, right? So humans are this disease that need to be eradicated. And this philosophy permeates the education system. And I know because I was subjected to it. The evolution theory, I think, is another really excellent example of this. The evolution theory is so fundamental to the worldview that they're trying to propose, that they're trying to indoctrinate people with. And what they don't tell you is that the entire thing is absolutely phony, that even by Charles Darwin's own metrics, it has been discredited, right? Charles Darwin gave 2 ways of discrediting his theory. We can easily discredit his theory using both of those 2 ways, and yet it continues to be taught in the government schools as if it were a fact. And what they also don't tell you is, and I experienced this personally, a lot of the evidence that's in the textbooks, alleged evidence, I should say, to support this silly theory, has actually been discredited in many cases for more than 100 years. I mean, the guys who came up with this alleged evidence were laughed at by their own universities. They had their degrees revoked because they got caught doing actual fraud, manipulating stuff. And, this stuff is still in the textbooks as evidence for evolution. So, it's very clear that this indoctrination is going on, that it's dangerous. And, again, if you look at the federal government's own numbers, this comes through loud and clear, right? Just recently, earlier this year, I was looking at a state education agency report for Washington, D.C. 68% of the people in Washington, D.C. over the age of 15 are functionally illiterate. That means they can barely read. They might be able to read a stop sign, but ask them to read anything beyond that, and they're going to be very confused. How can it be that we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on each of these kids, allegedly educating them, and more than 2/3 of them are graduating without being able to read? Something is not right there. I taught a 4-year-old how to read in a matter of a few months with almost no effort. The idea that these maniacs couldn't teach children to read in 15 years with hundreds of thousands of dollars at their disposal is so ludicrous. It's not even worthy of consideration. It's obviously not what's happening. And so you have to conclude that this is by design. And then what we've done in the book is we've compiled all the evidence from primary source documents to show that it was by design. So, when you've been subjected to this yourself, it's not as easy to understand what has happened. When I first heard that the evolution theory was fake, I was like, oh my goodness, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard in my life. What are you, some kind of backwards caveman, doesn't know anything about science? And it took a while for me to look at the evidence and grasp this and say, oh my goodness, I have been duped to the extreme. And when you realize how fundamental this is to the worldview, right? If you believe in the evolution theory, you have a very different worldview than you would have if you believe that God created us in his image, right? And that each human being is made in the image of God with a purpose. So we're talking about two worldviews that are completely incompatible. They're so fundamentally different, they can't even be compared. They're totally different. They're totally incompatible. And the government schools are indoctrinating the children into one of these worldviews, and it happens so subtly that the kids actually walk away thinking that this is reality, that they've been educated and that they've used their own critical thinking and their own faculties to arrive at these conclusions that ultimately are not just faulty, but are dangerous and are totally preposterous and are easily discredited by mountains of evidence that has been concealed from them in schools. So, I think it's a long process. And it wasn't until I was about maybe 16 or 17 that I started asking hard questions. And, when I was 18, I was like, oh my goodness, I think a lot of what I learned wasn't true. And by the time I was 20, I was like, oh my goodness, I think everything I learned was untrue. So I had to, go back and start at the beginning, examining each and every premise that I held as obviously true in my mind and, trying to re-examine it. Was this true? Was it not true? And it's a painful process. And, people don't like to admit that they were duped. There's always the pride element there, oh, I'm not stupid, I couldn't have been duped. And but when you boil it down, when you look at the facts, it is what it is. And it's sad, it's tragic, but there's that saying, the truth shall make you free. It actually comes from the Bible, but even beyond that, it's self-evidently true. The truth will make you free. And so I encourage people to re-examine everything you think you know, and just start from scratch. Deconstruct your worldview. Think about it. Does it make sense? Does it go with the evidence? The real evidence. And it has to start at really the fundamental level. And I think it's a big problem that people have been so steeped in this, they've never even been exposed to ideas outside of what they're taught is true and the worldview that they're exposed to in the government schools, that it doesn't even occur to people that they may have been misled. And so we do have a huge problem in that sense. And then we have the other problem, the problem of illiteracy, which is, again, deliberately engineered. What they've done here, the government schools, is that they've mass-produced illiterates. Again, we can go back to that federal literacy survey from 1993. The federal government's own numbers, and this was 1993, the situation is much worse now, but they found that 55% of Americans could barely read. They broke down reading levels into 5 categories, 5 being a really good reader, 1 being totally, completely illiterate, unable to read anything, 2 being basically functionally illiterate, not able to read much of anything except maybe a few words that you memorized in school, and then 3 and 4 being decent level of reading. And 55% of Americans fall into the bottom 2 categories. So even if people wake up and say, oh my goodness, I've been tricked, I don't really know anything, I've been brainwashed in the schools, even then, what do? You can't go to the library and pick up a book and learn. You can't pick up your Bible and read it and learn. You have to rely on the television, and you have to rely on the government schools and the government propaganda. So we have this double problem here. Is first of all the brainwashing, and second of all that they've eliminated people's ability to educate themselves. And so nowadays, we see YouTube and a lot of the talk radio and the programs like you guys are doing that have opened up a new avenue for people to be able to learn outside of the straitjacket that the government has imposed here. But is it too little, too late? I don't know. But it's certainly quite a pickle that we're in, to put it mildly.
Yes, well, you speak a lot of the, well, as you phrased it, the deliberate dumbing down of America. Is there a destruction then of the classes, the destruction of the middle class? I think you referred to at some point, because I mean basically, this is just an agenda that's global, really, right? I mean, just a kind of similar to what we see in the UN. I mean, in the EU rather, with just kind of a bringing everyone, balancing everyone equally at a close to poverty level, basically.
It is. Yep, that's exactly what it is, Richard. And if you look, actually, a lot of the globalists have said this themselves. I have a book in my library. It's A History of the World in Our Time, written by Carroll Quigley, who was a history professor at George Mason. He was actually Bill Clinton's mentor, one of the only people that Bill Clinton actually thanked in his introduction speeches. He helped shape his worldview. And in this book, he talks about the goal being the formation of a neo-feudalistic society, where you have the elite class at the top that has all the knowledge and all the wealth, and then you have the rest of us, right? And they're big on population control. They want to get rid of a lot of us. But those who survive, they want to be this kind of permanent underclass, and will be stacked and packed in these mega cities, these Orwellian totalitarian mega cities. And their plans for this are progressing right this instant. Whether you look at Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 or the Millennium Development Goals or the New Urban Agenda, all of this nonsense coming out from the UN, they don't even bother to conceal it anymore. They are creating a global society, a global totalitarian society with essentially two classes, right? The elite at the top and then the peasants at the bottom. And within the peasant class, there's variations, right? There's the useful idiot managerial class that'll help the elites to manage the lower classes. But at its core, we have two classes here: the super elite, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Bloomberg, these super elite families, and then the rest of us. And it's a sad vision for humanity. We like to think that we're so modern and that we're so advanced, and that that feudalism stuff, that was from past centuries, and we're not that dumb, we're not that lowly, we wouldn't fall for that stuff again. But unfortunately, that's exactly where we're going, and education is key. Bill Gates is, I think, a great example. He spent $2 billion, with a B, right, billion dollars, developing and promoting and implementing, and of course paying for propaganda to support this Common Core monstrosity, the Commie Core or Obama Core or whatever you want to call it. And yet he sends his kids to elite private school where they wouldn't touch Common Core with a 100-foot pole. Why do you think that is? Well, because the Common Core is for the common folk, right? For the peasants, for the serfs, if you will. And the elite class, they're the ones who get the knowledge. They're the ones who get the critical thinking skills. They're the ones who get to understand how the world really works. And it's fundamentally totalitarian, and it goes against everything that the United States was founded on, right? This idea that all men are created equal. Well, not to these guys, right? These guys think of themselves as superior, and it's not a new ideology. You can go back to Plato and his Republic, and this idea of the philosopher kings who are somehow superior to us and have this divine right to rule us. So it's not a new idea, but it's actually getting closer and closer to fruition as we move along, even while the dumbed-down masses think that we have blah, 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 democracy, blah, 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 freedom, not even realizing that they don't even understand what the word freedom is anymore. They have this totally perverted understanding of the word freedom. They think the word freedom means that the government's going to take care of them like little babies and give them, quote-unquote, education and, quote-unquote, health care, not realizing that by definition, that involves a loss of their freedom, right? If the government is taking care of you like you're some kind of baby or some kind of slave, you're by definition, you're losing freedom. They whine about, oh, we want government health care, we want government education, we want government to give us food. That's, just put your thinking cap on for a minute. That's how we treat prisoners, right? Prisoners get government food and government health care and government, they don't have any worries, they don't have any responsibilities because they're slaves, they're incarcerated. Same thing with slaves, right? The masters take care of the slaves. Yeah, they get a little bit of fake education. They get a little bit of fake health care. Yeah, the slave master gives them a roof over their head so that they can pick cotton. But, fundamentally, they don't have any freedom. And the same thing with cattle, right? Yeah, the ranch owner, yeah, he feeds the cattle. Yeah, he gives them medicine when they need it. But, they're still cattle, right? And you have nowadays massive numbers of people thinking that this is what freedom involves, right? I mean, just look at, how successful Bernie Sanders was. It's a testament to how effective these government schools have been in brainwashing the American people.
And so, well, this is, I mean, an attack on just critical thinking skills and individuality, just a general dumbing down of the average person, economically, bringing everyone down as well. And just their perception of things. I know, we touched on just even their perceptions of, their place in society, their perceptions of family, sexuality. I mean, all these things are being challenged more and more, varying, of course, depending on the continent and region you're speaking of and where they're at, of course. But it's just really something that people need to really start exploring, well, for any children in their lives, just and do more research if they don't believe us. I mean, well, what are some of the best places where we can find some of your articles and where you've been publishing most of your work?
The magazine that I write for the most often is The New American. A lot of it is in the print magazine, and most of it is online. It's at www.thenewamerican.com. We put up articles pretty much daily. Occasionally on the weekends we will just put up a few articles, but that's a really great place for information. It's I started writing for it because it was an awesome magazine that told the truth. And so I really highly recommend that as a resource. Just a few months of reading The New American, and even people who have been steeped in this brainwashing, little by little they begin to wake up and they begin to understand how the world really works. So that's a really great resource. I also write for WND and a whole bunch of others, and over the years I've written for lots and lots of magazines. Liberty Magazine is some Christian magazines, Crisis Magazine, a Catholic magazine, the Diplomat magazine, which is kind of an international affairs magazine, and then I've written for different newspapers, some in Florida, some overseas. I've written for a Swiss News magazine over in Switzerland, so just all kinds of different things. And if people want to just find stuff in general, they can just go on Google or any of the search engines. Actually, Google's pretty evil, so try DuckDuckGo or whatever. But just type in my name there, and you'll find all kinds of stuff. So.
Excellent. And well, I mean, there do seem to be a lot of attacks in general on the the social sciences seem to be a tool for changing the point of view of the future generation. I mean, we see all of these other subjects, the math, science, history sort of areas. I mean, they are, corrupted, and the information is skewed, but not quite as much of a focus, it seems, as the social sciences, where I mean, I don't know, some have considered that whole field to be just propaganda, really. I mean, what is your opinion on the social sciences and humanities in general?
Well, actually, it's funny you should ask. I actually teach economics, which is, in my opinion, a very important subject. It is certainly in the social sciences, but I can tell you, you're right on the money when you talk about the social sciences having been, totally corrupted. And that's not to say there's no value in the social sciences. I think, they're all very important subjects. The idea of a liberal arts education, I think, was a very good one, a very important one at one point in time. But unfortunately, like so many other things, it has been absolutely corrupted and rotten all the way to the core. So, what passes today as social sciences is little more than, thinly disguised indoctrination in Marxism and humanism and all these other dangerous isms without really any real regard for actual education or actual research or actual facts or data or anything like that. And it's a big shame because there would be a lot of value in these areas, and I think economics is a good example of that. If you don't understand economics as a society, we're going to be in big trouble, right? The type of economic system and economic policies that a country has are directly correlated to the amount of prosperity that a country has. An economically free society is going to be prosperous, almost by definition, right? Look at the most economically free countries in the world. You have Switzerland, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, Canada, Denmark, the United States for many years. And, the United States is still among the most free economically, but that's only because the rest of the world is even more totalitarian at this point. But economic freedom is directly correlated with how prosperous a society is going to be. So if you don't have any understanding of economics, you're liable to fall into these typical errors, like thinking that socialism is a viable economic system. And, not realizing that this has been tried over and over again. If you want more evidence, fly to Cuba, fly to North Korea, fly to Zimbabwe or Vietnam, and tell me how good socialism is working. Fly to Venezuela, right? They've had a little more than 10 years of experiment with this nutty socialism, and look where that took them. Now they're, standing in line for 2 days to try to get some toilet paper and some rice, and they're eating their pets, right? It's, it's a pathetic spectacle. And so the real world consequences of the corruption of social science are absolutely real, and they're absolutely tragic. I think all these countries that I just mentioned provide very good examples of that. And unfortunately, the same is true in the United States now. If you take economics in any college, pretty much any public college in the country, you're going to find a lot of indoctrination in the Keynesian worldview, in this idea that the government has a role to solve alleged economic problems. Oh, we're having a recession. Well, let's just have the government borrow $1 trillion and waste it hiring people to break big rocks into little rocks. And of course, this is ridiculous. It's so stupid. It's just a giant waste of resources, and it's going to cause more problems in the future. But because we have a lack of real education in the social sciences, there's not enough people in the country to point out and say, hey, wait a minute, that's a really dumb idea. You're going to be really harming our country. You're going to be harming our economy. You're going to be saddling us with debt for no reason. And so we end up with these very severe problems that could have been avoided if we just had enough educated people in this country. So it's tragic to see, and I just take economics as one example. We could apply it to all different areas as well. But again, the consequences are just tragic, and they would have been so easily avoided. So we do need to get back to proper education in the social sciences, and it's going to be a long road back to that, right? We have generations of people who've been indoctrinated and dumbed down in the pseudo social science, and so it's going to take a lot of work to be able to get back to where we need to be, but hopefully it is possible. And again, I think it's a very important thing. So
all right, well, yeah, I hope a lot of people out there will take your advice regarding the children who are in their lives, just to be aware of just all of the directions that these concerns can really come from when it comes to just all the subject matters and just the way your child is actually being brought up. I mean, and these days, statistically, I mean, the child spends much more of their awake hours interacting with those at the school than with the parent at home, especially with being more and more households where any parent who is there will be just occupied most other hours. I mean, that's what they want, right? I mean, to have the children spend less time with the family and more time in this environment, which is more indoctrination than anything else.
Oh, that is absolutely the goal. And I mean, if you see now, the federal government is lobbying again to make the school day longer and to shorten summer vacation. It's not enough that they get the kids 6-7 hours a day for basically the entire year. They want them even more. And Arne Duncan, Obama's education secretary, the guy who brags about turning kids into green global citizens using the schools, he was talking about government boarding schools. He said there's some kids that we need to have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the agenda is very simple: separate the kids from their parents, separate the kids from their parents' values, sever that connection with their heritage, with their history, and with the traditional values that get passed on from generation to generation. And you get a new class of kind of compliant citizens who don't know much of anything, but who are loyal to government über alles, to use a German expression. And we end up in a very dangerous situation.
Yes, well, it is a very real concern. I mean, it's just an overall taking over of the individual, and just the ability for, well, as you've put it, independent thought, in just someone's sense of self, and also, like as you say, just a dumbed down, compliant worker with no loyalty but to the system. Well, I mean, I don't know. Is there any other area that you'd like to touch upon with the time we have left here before the end of the hour?
Well, I just think I think people need to educate themselves, right? And we could talk about all kinds of different things and really where all this is going. We have the regionalization of the world, the breaking of the world into all these different regions: the European Union, the African Union, the Eurasian Union, the Union of South American States, and of course they want the North American Union. But ultimately it all boils down to education. If we can educate enough people, we can hold back these forces that are trying to implement this, what they call the New World Order. If we fail, it's going to be a very unpleasant time for a lot of people. We think the tyrannies of the last century were bad. Well, we haven't seen anything yet. And people need to understand, look back at history, look back at the last 100 years, that it's been dominated by maniacs, like genocidal psychopaths and mass murderers. What makes people think that these people disappeared? Right? They didn't disappear. They're still among us. They're all up and down the United Nations, all up and down the U.S. government, all up and down in Moscow and all the capitals. And it's so important that the good people get educated and arm themselves with facts and with the truth, because if we don't, again, we know where this ends, and it's nothing good. So, we have a tremendous responsibility to get involved here, because the alternative is going to be hellish.
All right, thanks for coming on again, Alex.
Oh, well, thanks very much for having me, Richard. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, all right, everyone. Well, this has been Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary. That was Alex Newman, and be sure to check out more of his work. We have his links that'll be posted